Ahwaz is a small town on the plains of southern Persia standing astride the river Karun. It's important as a pumping station on the pipeline between the oil wells in the hills and the great refinery in Abadan. At the outbreak of the Three-Day War against the Persians in 1941, 25 Indian Field Ambulance established itself in the school buildings on the banks of the river. In September 1941, 21 Combined General Hospital took over from the Field Ambulance, and the surgical cases hitherto treated by them came under my care. Among them, I was surprised to find a Gurkha soldier who'd had a 4-quarter amputation performed following a shark bite. It seemed extraordinary that such an accident could occur in a freshwater river, some 80 miles from the sea and about 30 miles from the Shatt-d-Arab, the great river formed by the junction of the Tigris and Euphrates, which runs into the head of the Persian Gulf. This was my first introduction to the sharks of Ahwaz. This Gurkha soldier was the only serviceman attacked by a shark and incidentally the only patient who lived to tell the tale. 12 other civilian patients who came under my care all lost their lives. It sounds bad, but the circumstances were seriously against good results. The casualties occurred mainly among young children and old people who were either undernourished or feeble with age. Usually the accident happened some distance away from the hospital, and transport was both crude and slow. Add to this the extremely serious nature of the injuries, the peculiar Oriental determination to die rather than to live, and the reasons for the fatalities becomes more understandable. The first and the last of my cases are those that I remember the best. The first because it was the first, and because the whole incident seemed so pathetically tragic. A small Persian boy, aged 6, was paddling on those slimy, sloping rocks by the water's edge whilst his mother was filling a water pot close by. He slipped and fell and was seized by a shark. When rescued, both arms were devoid of all the skin and muscle from the deltoid insertion down to the wrists. Fasciae and joint capsules only held the bones together. The right hand had been avulsed from the wrist. The ulna was divided as though by a saw at mid-length, whilst the other bones showed many grooves where vicious teeth had tried to snap through them. The child was brought to the hospital upon a donkey, having been placed face downwards with arms and legs dangling astride. It had taken about an hour to bring him from the scene of the accident through the desert sand and the ferocious heat of the Persian summer. He passed soon afterwards. The last case concerned an old man whom we'd all got to know, and the comparatively minor nature of his injuries together with the speed at which he'd received treatment made it seem as though here at last was a case of shark bite that would survive. This was the way of it. The commanding officer of 21 Combined General Hospital at the time was an enthusiastic fisherman who spent a great deal of his spare time trying to catch a shark. The tales of those that got away were truly amazing. The one as big as a motor car is well remembered. He tried for weeks with tackle of all kinds and a variety of baits ranging from goat's meat to ripe appendices. One day he came across an aged native fisherman who gave him the clue to success. He produced a handful of small nuts from a little bag hidden among his underclothes. If these were cut into small pieces, he said, and sprinkled on the water, small fish would presently come and devour them, and having done so would lose all sense of balance and swim upon the surface where they could easily be caught. These, he said, were the shark's normal food, and true to his word, he proceeded to demonstrate how these small fish might be collected. One early morning not long afterwards, I was standing on the flat roof of the hospital making a rough sketch of the people at the river's edge below. Some were bathing, some filling water pots, others were washing clothes by beating them on the rocks after the manner of the Indian dhobies, whilst yet others were merely carrying out the custom of using water instead of paper as a finishing touch. Among the little throng I saw the old fisherman, ankle-deep in water, sprinkling some of the grated nuts and gathering in his victims. Presently there was a great noise of shouting and clapping hands, and the water in front of him was churned into a foam, and I saw the old man slip and fall into the water. There he lay upon his back, half submerged, while the dorsal fin of a shark swirled up and down close by in the water that had a great red stain slowly spreading upon the surface. By the time I got there, he'd been dragged ashore. An examination showed that one foot had been crushed and lacerated, but no very grave damage had been done. We hurried him into the hospital, but scarcely had we started treatment before he bade us not to worry. "I'm going to die," he said, and we saw upon his face the strange expression of a mind convinced. Nothing we could do or say would convince him otherwise, and before the sun was set that day, he was gone. There's good reason to remember him, for that same evening, the CO caught his first shark. I well remember seeing him struggle up the bank, looking for all the world like the advertisement for Sailor brand salmon. It was 4 foot 10 inches long, but the weight has slipped my mind. Its dorsal fin had a great healed gash across the base where perhaps it had run foul of some net or cable, and within its stomach we found fragments of glass bangles. Another old man comes back to my mind who died 12 days after a shark bite of a secondary hemorrhage from his femoral artery, having had a mid-thigh avulsion for which he refused any form of surgical operation. He was a man of some local importance, and he was given a small ward to himself, which soon became filled with relatives, mostly women, and all dressed in black. He was an opium smoker, and the room soon became filled with that sticky aroma of sepsis and opium smoke. One morning I was alarmed to see the degree of his delirium, which at first I took to be due to his sepsis, but later found was partly due to lack of opium, which an enthusiastic young M.O. had forbidden. The moment of his death was dramatic. The still silence of his room was broken by a sudden outbreak of mournful wailing by the women, who stood up and waved their arms about and literally tore their hair and their clothes and bared their breasts so that they might beat them. They danced about in circles and rolled upon the floor, to the wide-eyed amazement of some BOR patients who were peering through the windows. Presently the charpoy was picked up, and the recently expired man carried out shoulder high across the courtyard to the street beyond. That was the last we saw of him. These 3 cases well illustrate why surgical results were so poor. There's no doubt that the injuries were appalling, and in Ahwaz at least, there was a local belief that the shark was a poisonous creature and death inevitable. However, we found no evidence for the latter. It was said that the sharks had a habit of lashing out with their tails and knocking the victims off their feet, who thereupon slipped off the rocks and fell into the deep water. This seems unlikely, as many of the people were only ankle deep, and it's probable that the sight of a shark so terrified them that in their own hurry to get away they slipped and fell. On one other occasion, I witnessed a shark attacking. There's a rather lovely suspension bridge across the river, which connects the old town of Ahwaz with the new. Whilst walking across this one evening about sunset, I heard the shouts of alarm from the banks below, and I saw a Persian soldier level his rifle and fire into the water. The shark could easily be seen from that height, and though several shots were fired, they missed their mark. People on the riverbank were hurrying out of the water, clutching their pots and pans and dragging children to safety. One small toddler got left behind and stood petrified among the din. The shark came near and certainly thrashed the water close by, and once or twice the tail was seen to break the surface, but it never came into the shallows. Had the child moved, it might well have fallen in and disappeared for good. Its terror alone saved it, until a man came wading in and grabbed it. Before writing this short memoir, it seemed worthwhile writing to Dr. Anderson at Abadan to hear of his experiences. His reply, which he's kindly given me permission to publish, makes interesting reading. He explains why there's a season in the year when sharks abound in the rivers of that part, and also why there's comparatively fewer cases in Abadan than in Ahwaz. Doubtless, too, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company regulates the use of the rivers around the island and controls its employees, or used to before nationalization, and prolonged European influence may have helped to dispel some of the local superstitions. At any rate, it's good to know that even the severe cases do well with good treatment, and I thank him for the trouble he's taken to give the details he has. If you ever go to Ahwaz, don't bathe in the river.